and welcome to episode 12 of the WiBit.net podcast, recorded live on October 27th, 2011. In this week's episode, we're going to talk about some WiBit updates, what new apps are available on the App Store, and which apps will be there very soon. You'll never guess what we're going to append to the end of the Programming in Java course. A LAN party update? Why not? Let's also talk about Stack Overflow and the influence that it has had on educating the technology community. And how about Linux? Which one of your favorite WiBit.netters has resurged as a Linux fanboy? We're also going to talk about PHP. Some programmers love it, some programmers hate it. Let's have a discussion about the goods, the bads, and the awesomes of PHP. And what's the deal with Richard Stallman? Let's talk about some of the comments that he's made recently about the passing of Steve Jobs. All this and much, much more coming up on the WiBit.net podcast. Hey guys, welcome to the WiBit.net podcast. Tonight we have the whole crew online. Kevin, myself, we have Brian, Jason, and Gary. What's up, gentlemen?
Hey, Kev.
Hey, howdy.
Hey, Gary didn't waste any time. I didn't even finish my sentence, and he's like, "Hey, Kev. Hey, Kev, let's hurry this thing up. I gotta go watch the World Series, man."
That's right.
Yes.
He's got the right attitude. It's the fantastic World Series going on right now.
Although I gotta say that one of my favorite, I guess it wasn't World Series, but ALCS's was the Yankees and the Red Sox, even though I hate both those teams. Remember when the Yankees were up like 3 or 4 zippy, and then the Red Sox came back and won like 4 in a row to win the series?
Oh, yeah, that was awesome.
Great.
That
Kevin,
was
I think
cool.
we were roommates when that happened.
We were roommates. Yes, we were roommates.
I remember going to the bar that night with you after that happened, and there was a lunar eclipse, and then we ran into like 15 people we went to high school with randomly all at the same time. That's still the weirdest night of my life.
We were at the rec room in Towson. I remember that.
Yep.
I remember that like it happened this morning. That was awesome. Well, guys, on the podcast tonight, we have an exciting show. The first thing we're going to talk about are the WiBit.net updates. And Brian, I think you have an update about some iOS action.
Yeah, and before I talk about the iOS action, something that occurred to me the other day when I was at work, and I wanted to get you guys' take on it real fast.
It's called a hemorrhoid, Brian. It's called a hemorrhoid.
Can you have that many of them?
I suppose you can. I have no idea.
So I was at work the other day, and I was bored out of my mind, as I sometimes am at work. And I was looking for a podcast similar to ours so that I could listen to it when I was at work, because that would be really enjoyable, you know? And that's why we make this one. And all of the ones that I found that looked kind of interesting stopped in like 2007, 2008, mainly 2008. Something happened in 2008 that was like the death to all podcasts. And I'm not exactly sure what that was.
It was the launch of the iPhone.
Do you think so?
No, I'm just saying.
No.
If you want to hear a good one, there's Buzz Out Loud on CNET. That's a good one, but that used to be a daily and now it's a weekly.
Huh? Buzz Out Loud. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, that's a really good one actually. They have a really good show there.
Anyway, so if anybody listening to this knows of any other good ones like Buzz Out Loud, let us know, because I wouldn't mind listening to them.
That's so cool. I would like to hear it too, so I hope people spawn with that. That'll be cool.
Okay, so iOS app stuff in the App Store. Programming in C is now available for sale right this second, which is awesome. It has the labs in it. It looks great. We kept it to devices with Retina displays and the iPad, so it looks crisp. You can prop up the iPad next to your screen and follow along. It's awesome. So C++ and Objective-C are under review right now, and Java's not too far behind them.
Yeah, and one of the things that we're going to be appending to the Java course, which I'm sure you guys have seen the Twitter posts and the blog, is Jason, what did we append to the Java course?
Well, Kevin, we got a tic-tac-toe app for Android coming.
Oh, man, that is so cool. So basically what we did was, so that everybody can have that exposure to the different platforms, is you guys remember that in the Objective-C course, we made the tic-tac-toe game for the iPhone device. Well, we did the exact same thing for Android, and Brian was unavailable because he was working on other projects, so Jason and I took the reins for this one. So Jason's first appearance in a tutorial is for the Tic-Tac-Toe Android app. How was that experience, awesome. Jason?
Yay!
How was that?
It was great. Now I've hired an agent. Talent agent, and
I can't wait to watch them. Sweet.
But I told Kevin when we were recording, it's kind of like Brian and I are like the Robins, and Kevin's like Batman, but I'm the second Robin, so I get blown up the Joker.
Nice.
So that could be the old butler hanging around the cave, right?
What was his name? What was the butler's name?
It was
Alfred.
Yeah.
Alfred.
Yeah. So guys, look out for that. The tic-tac-toe game is going to be released on the marketplace for those of you guys that want to support the site. And for those of you guys that want to expand your mobile development skills beyond the iPhone, because, I mean, some people don't know this, but other devices besides iPhones and iPads exist. But the Android is a great place to work in mobile development. The frameworks are awesome. It's relatively simple once you know how to program in Java and basics of XML and all that kind of stuff. So we also have an update for the LAN party. Now, we're a little bit late on the LAN party because we had initially intended to celebrate 1,000 users. And what are we approaching now, guys?
We're almost at 2,000 users.
Oh, boy.
Awesome.
So it took us 4 months to get from 0 to 1,000. It's taken us about 3 weeks to go from 1 to 2,000.
Nice, very nice. So one of the cool things about the LAN party is we're gonna kind of try to celebrate the 2,000 user mark, which seems to be rapidly approaching. And a great addition to this party is we were able to get a Cisco engineer, a Cisco networking engineer, to host the party for us. So he has tons and tons of equipment that we can take advantage of, so that we can host an international LAN party here, based out of Baltimore, Maryland, for all the WiBit.net community to share. Yes.
Yeah, so that's awesome.
Everybody go on the forums and get the games out that you want to play so we can collect them and you guys can collect them on your own, and we'll set up like a VPN for the VIPs to come on in, and we'll play an awesome all-nighter of LAN computer games.
Madness. That's awesome. That's going to be really cool.
I'm pretty fired up about it.
Yeah.
I've already bought a case of Mountain Dews.
Mountain Dews.
And some
we should set up a webcam so we can watch Jason get just hopped up on Mountain Dew.
And then keel over and pee my pants.
It's got to be one of those webcams that has only like 5 images per second, so he's all like stroby.
Oh, yeah.
You know? So he's like doing something, and then he's just disappeared, and then he's back, and you're like, what the hell is that?
Oh, now he has chips.
Yeah. I want some chips.
Oh, no, Kevin just tackled him to get the chips. Oh, okay. These guys are a bunch of dorks.
Who's that guy sneaking in behind him wearing a mask and has a baseball bat? Oh, he's bleeding. You should call the police, but we're not.
Another interesting topic that we're going to kind of go over here is Brian wanted to have a discussion about Stack Overflow and its influence on the internet world and technology world, and how it's been so helpful to online communities. So Brian, what's going on with Stack Overflow?
If you haven't used Stack Overflow, it's a site where you can kind of post questions, people answer the questions, and you can rate whether or not they answered your question. It's a great site. You've probably come across it and didn't even mean to. If you do any kind of programming, searching Google for whatever is going to eventually take you there. It's really well indexed. But what's interesting with Stack Overflow is that a long time ago, it was very difficult to get information from other people on the internet about problems you were having. And that like noob thing was a big deal. Like, you don't really hear the term noob so much anymore. People aren't so shitty. They're more understanding about, you know, people getting up to speed and learning new things. But a long time ago, it was like, oh, you don't know that because you're a noob, and that was the only. And you still have these poisonous pockets of communities,
like the Apple community.
Yeah, and some people might even argue in the PHP community. People say that it's the poisonous community. I don't really agree with that, but so I wonder if it's not so much the particular communities as much as just the way that the internet was structured and how people, you know, use forums and how they don't really work that well. And, you know, the incentive for people with the answers to post the answers isn't really there. You know what I mean? And I find myself doing that all the time, where I'll look on a forum for an answer to a question, and I don't find it. I solve the problem later, and I never think to go back to actually answer the question. And what Stack Overflow does is it makes it like a game. So it's kind of like you're rewarded for answering questions, and people want to get the badges, and they want to, you know, get their status up, or they want to get so many a day. And there's actually an upper limit to make sure that people aren't just answering questions all day, and that they actually take their knowledge and program with it, which is, you know, pretty funny because the developers actually found that people were spending too much time just answering questions, you know. But the quality of the answers that you get are totally understandable. They're not really shitty. They're, you know, the content's amazing. And I think it just goes to show that maybe those types of people are always there in all communities. It's just that getting access to their answers has always been a little bit of a challenge. And it just took that little bit of incentive to kind of get people to you know, to participate. But I think Stack Overflow is a total game changer for how people communicate about very complicated issues on the internet. So Stack Overflow has recently expanded into Stack Exchange, and they have a similar site on like the English language and grammar, which is really interesting, about gaming, game programming, about just Ubuntu questions. It's really interesting. So I definitely do want to tip my hat to Stack Overflow, because it's a It's a pretty awesome site.
Well, if you're going to do a tip of the hat, then I got to do a wag of the finger at Experts Exchange, because that site...
Experts Exchange.
That's awesome.
Expert Exchange are the worst website ever. Oh my god!
When you do a Google search, some stupid thing that you wanted, and then it comes up with an Experts Exchange answer, and you didn't pay attention. And I'm not paying for that. Oh my
god!
And then has anybody else ever actually paid for one of those answers before?
Hell no.
No, I've never done that.
But the answers are, I know, and I don't find this Experts Exchange coming up in search results as often. I think
they used to a lot though.
Yeah,
like 4 years ago, Expert Exchange came up. Oh, so bad.
That's what I was gonna. Joomla development unlike Drupal development for when we were talking about like CMS web development stuff. Drupal has a very extensive, very well supported community of thousands and thousands of developers that always have lots of answers to all kinds of questions. Joomla, on the other hand, doesn't have really anything. Their documentation is horrible. There's nobody giving answers anywhere except for apparently on Experts Exchange. So one time I used Experts Exchange to get an answer to a Joomla question, and the answer was wasn't even a valid answer. It was a non-answer. It was the answer that I paid for was basically, can you define your question a little bit better?
Nice. That is, oh god, that is perfect.
Yeah. That's
classic. Great. Well, Stack Overflow, we salute you. And I know that all of us have used Stack Overflow over the years. Another topic that we want to talk about is, remember a couple weeks ago, guys, we talked about Linux and the new version of Ubuntu and stuff. And one of the things when I listened to that podcast afterwards, one of the things that I noticed that I said was, and Brian, you backed me up on this because you and I lived together, and Jason were our roommates for a while as well, but I used to always have a Linux workstation, always.
Oh, yeah.
And I would always use Linux for everything and Windows just in case. So after I listened to the podcast, I was like, what the hell? Like, why don't I have a Linux box? So I went back in one of my old closets, and I found an old, rusty, dusty piece of crap, computer that's just been rusting away for like 4 years. I brought her out and put Ubuntu on it, and then installed KDE on it, and I've been using that as my primary workstation.
That's awesome.
And I gotta tell you, man, I haven't used Linux in a couple of years, but it has gotten so good. I've noticed a lot of the hardware compatibility issues. There are still some, like my headset that I record these podcasts on don't work on it, but pretty much all of my other devices work just fine. And then, there's so much software out there nowadays for Linux that there never was before. And one of the things, Jason, that you brought up that was kind of against Ubuntu, which I agree with you at first, but you said that you didn't like the new Ubuntu App Store, right?
Well, the App Store, and they got away from Genome and all that too, haven't they?
No, Genome is still the primary shell for Ubuntu. It's just that it's gotten a facelift, is what it's gotten. But you know what you do? You know what I figured out, Jason, is when you get into the Ubuntu App Store, you just install Synaptic, and then you just have Synaptic. So it's just like the good old days.
Yeah, that's
okay.
Nice.
That's the first thing I did.
Actually, Kevin, depending on what Ubuntu version you're using, you're right, Genome's still there, but the new Ubuntu going forward is actually using something called the Unity interface.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
So not to be snarky or anything.
That's
all
cool.
Right.
apt-get is always awesome, too.
Oh, you gotta love apt-get.
apt-get is just sweet. I mean, talk about like saving just horrible headaches. You're like, oh wait, I could just get it on apt-get? No way. And you're like, apt-get -install
all
name.
dependencies
and you're like, holy
come down.
crap, this is sweet. Yeah,
it's so
awesome.
beautiful. I got it set up for NetBeans and for Android development, and it runs so beautifully. And the one thing that I've always loved about Linux was you can take a machine that's like 35 years old and put Linux on it, and it runs like a champ.
Yeah, it's true. Absolutely true.
I've always loved that about Linux, and this is the same. The computer that I have here is probably from like 2003, and it runs like a brand new machine. I have all of the user interface fade in, fade out. It looks beautiful. So I want to kind of just add to that. Linux, you're awesome. I'm back in the Linux camp. I'm in love with Linux.
I'll make a point to make sure I get download Ubuntu, make sure it's up and running. I'll give it a start.
I would like to issue a challenge to the hardware compatibility thing. I think the Ubuntu is the big winner there. If you tried Fedora, I bet you have all the same old.
Yeah, Ubuntu's always had a leg up on hardware compatibility. I agree.
Well, I will say this about Fedora. Fedora. Fedora's always really kind of sucked. So, I've never been a Fedora fanatic.
If you're gonna go Red Hat, you might as well go CentOS, in my opinion.
Yeah,
CentOS has a GUI, I think, version. I don't know.
It does. It does, but for a personal desktop, do you really think that Red Hat is a good personal desktop?
No, CentOS is a great server system.
You're right. It's a business operating system. Yeah, I would never think of Red Hat as a personal desktop OS. Personally.
Yeah, but Ubuntu is it's solid.
Yeah, man. I mean, I got my work VPN working on this thing. I got Dropbox, everything that I use on my Windows box, except for just like 2 or 3 things. I love it. So I'm back in the Linux camp. All right. So you won again, Linux.
So maybe that means when we do C#, we should do it in Mono and Linux.
That would be very interesting because we have access.
Because we have been underrepresenting Linux in our courses.
Yeah, and the reason why we chose that, Brian, remember, because we had assumed that was going to be the majority of our user base.
Oh yeah.
And Jason, does that represent the user base? Do we have a decent amount of Linux users?
I mean, I haven't heard one way or the other on OS. Is really, I guess we do have one guy in the forum, Span, one of our moderators. He's a big Linux fan, but otherwise, I haven't heard anybody really sound off too much about that. Yeah, there's a forum thread about why anybody would choose Linux or something. But for the most part, I think people are kind of whatever works.
I think most of our Linux users are pirates from Russia.
Hey, Kev, in answer to your question, the operating systems that are coming in, you got Windows at 75%, Linux is number 3 at 11%, tied with Macintosh at 11. Yeah, but they're right next to each other. One's Mac's like 11.97 and Linux is 10.7.
So maybe.
I think part of the reason that open source or Linux didn't take off, I guess, the way that Apple did, and maybe I'm wrong, but there wasn't any kind of sexy looking laptop you could sit at a coffee shop with a cool looking fruit that was glowing on the front of it that made everybody jealous.
Yeah, but you had a penguin. The Linux icon is awesome. I love the penguin.
But what notebook has ever used the penguin on its, like, the closest they ever got was Dell came out with an Ubuntu laptop for a while. Yeah. And then there was the netbooks. The netbooks were mostly Linux. The best operating systems to ever go on a netbook was Linux, and we've already covered that. The tablets replaced the netbooks. Why would you get a netbook if you can get a tablet?
So you're saying they blew it because they didn't keep up with the cool hardware?
Well, I think the big thing is if Microsoft released their product line for Linux, which would be really stupid on their part, but if they released Office for Linux, because I mean, OpenOffice is all right, but it's just not. It's just not there.
OpenOffice. I'd rather use Google Docs than OpenOffice.
Yeah, I would too.
Yeah, OpenOffice lacks a lot.
It does, and so does Apple's Numbers, Pages, and Keynote. They kind of blow. I'm sorry. They suck.
Yeah. So maybe that was the turning point when Office ported to Macs when Steve Jobs came back to Apple.
Yeah, that could be a pretty big factor. I think Photoshop, GIMP sucks too. I'm sorry, like GIMP it's open source. It's great. It's awesome, but Photoshop is just you can't compare the two of them.
Right, but
so I've very much tried to.
I have too a lot. But if we could get Office and Photoshop on Linux, I think it would just take off like gangbusters
natively. Because you can get Photoshop on Linux.
Yeah, you can use Wine.
It sucks.
Yeah, it does suck.
It's never very good.
Yeah, it runs like a Java app or a PHP program, as Brian would say. So let's have a discussion here about PHP. So I know, Brian, you were kind of talking in the pre-show about some people are kind of fighting against PHP, and Jason and I are going to take the opposite side because we're both huge fans of PHP. So what is your gripe?
I also want to defend PHP personally because I kind of like PHP, but I'll just say from some nameless, faceless attacker, here's the arguments that I'm hearing a lot about people who passionately dislike PHP. The number one complaint that I find is people say PHP code is really messy. It's code. The code is all kind of dynamically driven, and you can't really grab onto stuff. It's spaghetti SQL wrapped up in HTML that's flared just all over the place. It's being printed out from strings that are mismatched and chunked together, and spaghetti PHP code is just kind of all over the place. And so it's very messy. It's very unmanageable. In all performance metrics, PHP is slower than Java, which is extremely slow. The language lacks strongly typed lamped data types. So if you have a variable come in, you can't tell, on the onset if it's a string or if it's a number or whatever it is. You kind of just have to always treat them like you don't know what it is, and that can cause some issues in some fringe cases. That can actually cause a lot of issues. But most scripting languages,
if you're a bad programmer, it can cause all kinds of issues.
Yeah, exactly.
So it lacks data types. There's no namespaces. So things can kind of all mess all over the place. So people generally think PHP shouldn't be as popular as it is. They don't understand why people use it, and it sucks.
Okay, well, Jason, let me hear the rebut. What is your rebuttal to PHP code is messy?
Any code can be messy.
You're damn right about that. Try reading through some Java code.
Yeah, absolutely. Any code could be messy, and I want to preface my response to all the bulleted arguments by just saying I think a lot of people, PHP developers especially, they consider PHP some kind of object-oriented language, which it's not. It's a scripting language with object-oriented elements at best. So it's not really fair to compare it to. I mean, sure, it might be a little bit slower than Java and everything, but it's not intended to be used the same way as Java is, I don't think. And as far as it being spaghetti code and being dynamic, wrapped in SQL, wrapped in HTML, that's kind of what it's for. It's for web pages and for single delivery elements and things. You're just trying to deliver one thing, dynamically real fast and then kind of move on. PHP isn't. It's just the intermediary for your web pages. So I don't know why you would use it for much else.
Yeah. So I mean, I'd say a LAMP server is a very lightweight, great. Just throw it on a thumb drive and run it on your watch, and you have a pretty banging web server. I mean, I don't know. I think most people that I know a ton of people who started web development in PHP. Myself included, and I think Kevin included.
Yep, it's a gateway drug for web development. You're right about that.
And me as well. That's what I do. That's where I came from.
And I think the way the language was designed is actually, it can lend itself to be some really messy code, and I agree with the spaghetti code complaint. But at the same time, the language is, if you're consistent in your naming convention and you clearly define your variables, you can have a really nice, natural, readable flow. It's very easy to understand when if you don't have a lot of programming background, and I think part of it is because it's not overly object oriented. It just has some object kind of components. But so I think for people starting out, PHP is great. If you need to build some crazy huge enterprise thing that's going to be taking hundreds of thousands of hits a minute, it's probably not what you want to use, but it depends.
I'm going to lay it out this way. I mean, there are different types of languages that exist for different purposes. When you start talking about scripting languages in particular, if you just name a few off the top of your head, JavaScript, VBScript, PHP, Python, they all kind of have in Perl. I mean, Perl and PHP, I mean, they're almost apples and apples. I mean, they behave the same. TCL is another example of a language that fits this criteria. A lot of them have that loosely typed architecture. That's just how they're designed. A scripting language is designed to be like water. That's what a scripting language is for. So to complain that it's not strongly typed, I think is a little bit ridiculous when you're talking within the context of a scripting language. The whole thing about spaghetti code, and as Jason pointed out, any programmer can write code that looks like crap. If you organize your code nicely, I've seen some horribly written Perl and PHP code, but I've seen some genius written PHP code as well. So, and
I would also argue, the spaghetti code often comes from people appending things inside of like HTML text and stuff. And when you use, like in Java, JSP, or use some Java backend, behind JSP, like Wicked or something, you don't see those tags. But those tags are generated somewhere. And how do you think they eventually get the text out to the browser? By concatenating strings together. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So even the frameworks where you don't actually see the HTML being written out quite so directly, the same thing's still kind of happening nonetheless. So if you just abstract your code out properly, you can keep PHP pretty clean, and it's fine.
Well, see, that's why I kind of like PHP as it is like that then, because that kind of gives you, I mean, you're directly in charge of how things are declared and everything.
Yeah, that's true. It's almost like a manual transmission in a certain sort of a sense.
Yeah, so it's not as I don't know, easy on the back end. But one thing I wanted to say that you said something a few minutes ago made me think of it. Some of the worst code in PHP I've ever seen was when somebody treated PHP like it was Java or something and created these huge class files.
Oh yeah, I agree.
And that's just not what PHP is. Yep. So if you get somebody that's not used to PHP or not used to writing web pages that way, and have them come in and sit down and try to make something, and they approach it in that way, they're going to come out with that kind of opinion of it being so messy and being so hard because they're doing it. They're not looking at it the right way. They're not looking at it like it's water, and then they're complaining when it's not flowing like water.
Yeah. So I don't know. PHP. I think we at WiBit.net love PHP, and if you don't like it, you're crazy. That's just the bottom line. So,
speaking of eccentric coders who like to complain about things.
Yeah, very good segue, Jason. Who are you talking about?
I'm talking about Richard Stallman.
The rabbi himself.
Absolutely. I guess he may also moonlight as a mohel. I don't know. Richard Stallman, we all know he's very eccentric, and I don't know if many of the WiBit people know who Richard Stallman is, but he's a very important person, and Kevin expressed some very deep love for him.
Hey, I respect the guy. I respect the guy a lot. Sorry.
We should all. He's been in the news a lot lately, though, so I thought it was worth mentioning on the podcast just to get his name out there and kind of build awareness of the Stallster, as I like to call him when I hang out with him regularly. But he had the thing. He said something about Steve Jobs when Steve Jobs passed away that was kind of taken. He said, and I quote, "I'm not glad he's dead, but I'm glad he's gone." So that kind of got a bunch of people upset. And the reason he says things like that, and why we're calling him so eccentric, is he calls himself the last hacker. He's kind of a technological elitist or purist in his own way, depending on how you want to phrase it. And he has his theories and things about how the technology world should be, and obviously the way it is doesn't match his opinions. But there was an article on Gizmodo that just caught my attention where he has a website where he allows people to hire him as a public speaker, since he is the father of GNU and he's done a lot of pretty important things in technology. And just some of the things on this press release, like for example, he's kind of a jerk. He puts in his press release for hiring him to be a public speaker, and I quote, "Please don't be surprised if I pull my computer out at dinner and begin handling some of my email. I have a difficulty hearing when there is noise at dinner when people are speaking to me. So I'll just, rather than feel bored or impose on everybody else by asking them to speak slowly, I'll just do some work." So he's letting you know in his press release that he may just treat you like a jerk and play on his computer rather than talk to you.
That's awesome.
Well, I will say a few things about Stallman that I've noted. I mean, all right, I don't subscribe to him completely. What I do have for Stallman is an appreciation for his contributions to the free software movement, which, if that never existed, computing as we all know it would not exist. But, he does kind of get a little bit radical. He does kind of get a little bit elitist. But if you kind of wipe away his BS attitude, in his philosophy about, it's free as in free speech and not free beer, he has some interesting points. But like I was telling you guys in the pre-show, one of the things that I've kind of noticed about Stallman is that he just likes to say things to get a kick, I think. I think he's just one of those types of personalities, In order for him to stay relevant, he just has to say stupid crap. And that's what he does. If you watch his interviews, he always says 2 or 3 things that is just the dumbest thing you ever heard him say, but you just giggle at it. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not really so much bringing this stuff up to dog him so much as kind of just make it put his name out there. We mentioned his name because we matter so much, but we also use web browsers, which are a bad thing in his eyes too. So if we tried to hold ourselves up to the Stallman standard, we would all fall way short, and smartphones probably wouldn't exist, which would suck. And
so how about this? How about in honor of Stallman? What if we put together a list of the our opinion of the best open source projects out there now, and who's behind them?
That sounds like a good idea. I was actually gonna just make the WiBit.net links compatible.
Nice, that'd be actually hilarious.
I don't know if he even uses
browser.
Would Lynx count as a web browser? I know he has a bot.
Lynx is absolutely a web browser.
No, Lynx is a web browser. That's actually the name of my cat. I named my cat after Lynx, the web browser.
Well, I guess he wouldn't use Lynx then. That's too bad.
All right, guys. Well, that kind of wraps up the end of the WiBit.net podcast. Thank you guys for joining us, and we'll try to get something together next week. And keep an eye out on the website, guys, because that Android stuff is coming before you know it. So take care, everybody, and we'll see you on the sites. Bye. Bye, Brian. Bye, Jason. Go watch your World Series, boys.
Yeah.
Brian's not going to watch the World Series.
Brian's gonna watch the opera.
Probably not.
There's probably some tap dancing competition on he's gonna watch. Thank you for supporting WiBit.net. For more content, please check us out on iTunes, wibit.podomatic.com, Facebook.com/WiBit and WiBit.net. WiBit.net.